What if I told you that the anger consuming you isn't a problem with emotional control, but the result of a perceptual illusion so deep that you don't even realize you're living within it? Imagine discovering that every outburst, every accumulated resentment, every hurt you carry doesn't exist because someone did something to you, but because you're operating under a false premise about who you are and who they are. An illusion so ingrained in the fabric of human thought that entire generations have lived and died without ever questioning it. This isn't another video about anger management techniques or calming breaths that work for 5 minutes. I'm not going to teach you how to better control your emotions while the mental structure that creates anger remains completely intact. It's not about counting to 10, visualizing white light, or repeating forgiveness mantras that sound nice but don't address the root of the problem. What you're about to discover comes from a lineage of masters who realized something revolutionary. Anger doesn't need to be suppressed, managed, or controlled. It needs to be dissolved at its source through a radical shift in perception. There's a devastating emotional drain that comes from carrying chronic anger. It consumes your vital energy like a slow, steady fire, poisoning relationships that could be a source of connection, and turning you into a prisoner of resentments others no longer remember. And the cruelest part is that the more you try to control it, the stronger it becomes. Because the very act of trying to control it reinforces the illusion that there's a separate you struggling against an invading emotion. But Alan Watts, the British philosopher who translated Eastern wisdom in a modern Western language, discovered something Zen masters had known for centuries. Anger isn't a problem of willpower. It's a problem of misperception about separation. In this video, for the first time, you will access the complete knowledge that has been fragmented among Buddhist, Taoist, and Vedantic traditions, all converging on an identical truth. When you see through the illusion of separation between self and other, anger literally loses its existential fuel. Not because you have become an enlightened saint above human emotions, but because the cognitive structure that generates anger, the belief in a fixed self being attacked by a fixed other, simply dissolves when exposed to the light of understanding. Brace yourself, because what comes next is not abstract philosophy for intellectual contemplation. It is perceptive technology tested over thousands of years that can instantly transform your relationship with the most destructive emotion humans experience. Welcome to Axiom Sage, where the timeless wisdom of the East meets the emotional struggles of modern life. This is Alan Watts' secret that instantly quells anger. Have you ever noticed how your anger always seems completely justified the moment it arises? You're not being irrational. You're standing up for something legitimate. They really were unfair. They really disrespected you. They really violated your boundaries. And because your anger has valid reasons, you feel entitled to feed it, express it, keep it alive as proof that you won't accept being treated this way. But here's the brutal truth no one told you. This need to be right in your anger is precisely what keeps you trapped in it. Our culture has built a dangerous collective neurosis around the ego and its defenses. We've been trained since childhood that there's a separate, fixed you that needs to be defended against external attacks. When someone criticizes you, the ego interprets it as a threat to your identity. When someone rejects you, the ego interprets it as a diminishment of your value. When someone acts in a way that contradicts your expectations, the ego interprets it as a violation of your territory. And then anger arises, not as a random emotion, but as an automatic defense mechanism protecting something you believe to be you. The problem is that every time you express anger, every time you mentally stew in resentment, every time you justify your indignation, you are literally reinforcing specific neural circuits in your brain. Neuroscience calls this negative neuroplasticity. The more you practice a mental pattern, the more automatic it becomes. Then anger stops being a situational response and becomes your personality. You become angry person, resentful person who never forgets offenses. And at that point, anger is no longer an emotion you feel. It's an identity you defend. Alan Watts realized something profound that Zen masters had already taught. Anger is defending a ghost. The fixed idea of who you think you should be, how you think you should be treated, how the world thinks it should work. But this you being defended isn't real. It's a mental construct, a narrative you tell yourself about yourself. a character you believe you're playing. And when you defend a ghost, you're fighting battles that can't be won because they're based on a false premise. The belief that there's a solid, permanent, separate self that needs constant protection. Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist who has studied meditators for decades, discovered something extraordinary. Advanced meditators show dramatically reduced activation in the amygdala, the brain region responsible for fear and anger responses, even when exposed to direct provocation. This isn't because they've suppressed their emotions, but because the cognitive structure that interprets events as threats to the self has been modified by years of seeing through the illusion of separation. They don't need to control their anger because the perception that generates anger has fundamentally changed. You're not toxic for feeling angry. You're stuck in a mental loop that confuses ego defense with real survival. And as long as you continue to believe your anger is about others, about what they did, how they treated you, how much they deserve your indignation, you'll remain hostage to an emotion that's actually defending a ghostly version of yourself that never existed outside your mental constructs. There is a lineage of masters who have spanned millennia, arriving at the same revolutionary conclusion about anger. It arises not from external circumstances, but from an internal misperception of separation. These were not theorists speculating comfortably. They were practitioners testing these truths in their own minds, meticulously observing how anger arises, where it comes from, and what happens when you see through its foundations. Alan Watts was born in London in 1915, the son of conservative parents in a rigidly stratified society. At 16, he discovered Zen Buddhism and became fascinated by a question Western culture never adequately asked. Who am I really? He spent decades studying Taoism, Zen, and Vedanta, not as a collector of exotic ideas, but as a sincere investigator trying to understand the nature of consciousness and human suffering. And in his lectures and writings, he translated complex Eastern concepts into accessible language that touched on modern issues: anxiety, alienation, chronic anger, and a sense of inner fragmentation. Watts understood something Buddha had taught 2,500 years earlier. Suffering, and anger is an acute form of suffering, arises from the illusion that there is a separate self being attacked by a separate other. Buddha observed his own mind with surgical precision and saw that the suffering self is not a fixed entity, but an ever-changing process. When you look for this angry self, you find nothing solid, only transient thoughts, passing sensations, fluctuating mental narratives. And if there is no fixed self, who exactly is being attacked? Who needs to defend what? In ancient India, Shankara, the founder of Advaita Vedanta, took this investigation even further. He taught that identifying with the body-mind as a separate entity is a fundamental error of human perception. You're not a body possessing consciousness. You are consciousness temporarily manifesting as a body. And when you see this, not intellectually, but perceptually, the entire structure of self versus other collapses. There is no you inside the head looking at the world out there. There's only one consciousness experiencing itself through infinite temporary forms. Nagarjuna, a 2nd century Buddhist philosopher, refined this understanding through relentless logic. He demonstrated that there is neither a solid self nor a non-self. Both are conceptual extremes created by the mind. Reality lies in the middle path, beyond existence and non-existence as rigid concepts. When you try to find where you ends and other begins, you can't draw a definitive line. Your body is made of food that came from the earth. Your thoughts are made of language you learn from others. Your emotions are shaped by experiences with other people. Where's the clear boundary between inner and outer? And Lao Tzu, author of the Tao Te Ching, observed that every action generates an opposite reaction. When you defend yourself rigidly, you create conflict. When you resist what is, you create suffering. Wu Wei, action without forced resistance, does not mean passivity, but flowing with reality rather than fighting it. Anger is ultimate resistance. This shouldn't be happening, but is happening. And your resistance doesn't change what happened. It only adds suffering to the situation. These masters never met. They lived centuries and thousands of miles apart, but they all converge on an identical truth. Anger arises from identification with a separate ego, And when you see through this separation, not as a pretty idea, but as direct perception, anger literally loses its existential basis. There is no longer a separate self to defend. Only life manifesting in interdependent and transient forms. If you're starting to sense there's something much deeper here than superficial behavioral techniques, write in the comments, "I see through." And subscribe to this channel by activating the bell, because we'll explore every layer of this perceptual transformation, not to temporarily inspire you, but to fundamentally reconfigure how you experience reality. Let me tell you about Mariana. 38 years old, a project manager at a tech startup in Sao Paulo, divorced for 2 years, with a 9-year-old daughter. From the outside, a competent woman overcoming challenges. From the inside, a constant cauldron of barely contained rage. Rage at her ex-husband, who cheated on her. Rage at the colleague who got the promotion Mariana deserved. Rage at her mother, who criticized her choices. Rage at traffic, at the government, at people who didn't respond to emails quickly. Mariana knew that anger was poisoning her life. It drove people away, harmed her health, made each day exhausting. But she couldn't stop. Mariana had tried everything culture offered for anger management. Therapy that helped her understand the origins of her childhood anger, but didn't change her reactivity pattern. Guided meditations that temporarily calmed her, but didn't prevent the next outburst. Nonviolent communication techniques that worked when she was calm, but disappeared when anger arose. Physical exercise that released tension for a few hours. And after each failed attempt, her internal narrative grew more hopeless. This is my nature. I was born this way. I'll die this way. It was in a moment of painful clarity, after exploding at her daughter over something trivial and seeing fear in her eyes, that Mariana stumbled upon Alan Watts's YouTube talk. And one specific line pierced her armor of justifications. When you're angry, ask, who's angry? And if you look honestly, you'll find no one there. Just fleeting thoughts about a self that doesn't exist the way you believe. For the first time, Mariana considered the disturbing possibility. What if anger wasn't about the things that happened, but about how she perceived herself in relation to those things? Mariana began a simple but radical practice. Whenever anger arose, instead of justifying or suppressing it, she investigated. Where is this me that's angry? She searched her body, finding muscular tension, heat in her face, rapid breathing, but finding no solid me feeling angry. She searched her thoughts, finding narratives of injustice, memories of past offenses, fantasies of revenge, but finding no fixed thinker thinking these thoughts. She searched her emotions, finding intense energy circulating, but finding no permanent entity having this emotion. And something extraordinary began to happen. When Mariana couldn't find a solid I who was angry, the anger began to lose intensity. Not because she was suppressing it, but because the cognitive structure that sustained the anger, I am someone specific who was wronged by someone specific, began to reveal itself as a mental construct, not a fixed reality. In the first few months, this happened only occasionally in moments of deliberate practice. But after 6 months of consistent investigation, the awareness began to become more automatic. A year later, Mariana is no longer an enlightened Buddha above all emotions. Irritation still arises. Frustration still sets in. But something fundamental has changed. She no longer identifies with anger as my anger, or who I am when I'm angry. Anger emerges as a transient phenomenon in consciousness, like the sound of a passing car, perceived but not personalized. And without personalization, without a story about me being attacked, anger naturally dissipates in minutes instead of lasting for days or weeks. She has discovered the secret Alan Watts was trying to convey. You don't need to kill anger. You need to see through the illusion of separation that fuels it. And the promise I make now is the same one Mariana discovered. There is a proven path to the permanent dissolution of chronic anger, not through heroic control or forced suppression, but through a perceptual shift about the nature of self and separation. In the next few minutes, you will receive the complete transmission, the ancient teachings that transformed Mariana and that can completely reconfigure your relationship with the most destructive emotion humans carry. The relentless investigation of the phantom self. Alan Watts repeatedly asked in his lectures, "Who's angry?" It seems like a simple question, but when you investigate honestly, the answer becomes elusive. Mariana had to admit the uncomfortable truth. She couldn't locate a fixed I that was feeling angry. She found thoughts of injustice, bodily sensations of tension, impulses to lash out verbally, but she couldn't find a permanent entity coordinating it all. The radical practice: when anger arises, pause completely. Don't try to suppress or express it. Just ask with genuine curiosity, where's the I that's feeling this? Search the body, the thoughts, the emotions. You'll find processes happening, but you won't find you as a solid, separate entity. And in this inability to locate the I, something dissolves. Because if there's no fixed I, who needs to be defending what? Anger loses its protagonist, the witness who doesn't get involved. Tsukuyomi, the Japanese god of the moon, represents the power to observe without being consumed. The moon reflects everything without being altered by what it reflects. When you develop the ability to witness anger without identifying with it, an extraordinary transition occurs. Mariana learned the crucial difference. I am angry versus anger is present in consciousness. The first sentence personalizes and solidifies. The second sentence observes the transient phenomenon. The practice: when anger arises, instead of merging with it, take 3 deep breaths and mentally declare, anger is present now. Not my anger, just anger. This subtle but radical distance between observing consciousness and the observed phenomenon dissolves identification. You realize that you can observe anger without being angry. And if you can observe, you are not it. Consciousness that observes anger remains unaffected by anger, just as a movie screen is not burned by the flames that appear in the film projected onto it. The systemic vision that dissolves guilt. Shanadeva, an 8th century Buddhist master, taught something revolutionary. If someone hurts you, don't blame them. Blame the infinite causes and conditions that condition that person to act that way. When you see human behavior as the result of an infinite chain of causes, genetics, childhood, trauma, cultural conditioning, neurological state at the time, attributing personal blame becomes logically impossible. Mariana began practicing this when she felt the urge to blame someone, mentally listing 5 possible causes for their behavior that had nothing to do with her. Maybe they were going through a personal crisis. Maybe they were operating from unresolved trauma. Maybe they were raised in an environment where this behavior was normal. The more you see causes and conditions, the less room there is for the villain maliciously choosing to hurt me narrative. And anger depends on this narrative. Dissolve the narrative, anger loses fuel. The ritual of felt interdependence. Mirror neurons neuroscientifically prove what mystics knew intuitively. There are no rigid boundaries between self and other. When you see someone suffering, the same brain regions activate as if you were suffering. We are much more porous, more interconnected than the isolated ego likes to admit. Mariana created a daily ritual. 5 minutes contemplating interdependence. The air I breathe was exhaled by plants. The food I eat came from land cultivated by people I will never see. The thoughts I think use words I learned from others. The body is an ecosystem of trillions of microorganisms, without which I would not exist. Where exactly is the line that separates self from not self? The more you feel interdependence, not as a pretty idea, but as a visceral reality, the more absurd anger becomes. It's like your left hand being angry with your right hand. They are both parts of the same organism. The parable of the empty boat. Zhuangzi told a simple but profound parable. You're sailing on a calm river when an empty boat bumps into yours. You don't get angry at the empty boat. You just adjust your course. But if you see someone steering that boat, anger explodes instantly. Same physical situation, completely different reactions. Why? Because you project malicious intent. They should have paid attention. They disrespected me. But what if you treated all boats as empty? What if you saw that people's behavior is equally mechanical, the result of programming, conditioning, a momentary neurological state, not the free choice of a separate self maliciously deciding to attack you? Mariana began using empty boat as a mantra when irritation arose. Empty boat. Empty boat. A reminder that the person isn't acting to hurt you. They're acting from their own causes and conditions, as mechanical as a drifting boat. Forgiveness that forgives nothing because nothing happened to someone. Alan Watts warned about performative forgiveness. You forgive the person but maintain the mental structure of separate self that was hurt by another separate self and now magnanimously choose to forgive. This doesn't dissolve anger. It just covers it with a spiritual layer. Authentic forgiveness isn't an action you perform. It's a natural consequence of expanded perception. When you see through separation, when you understand interdependence, when you recognize that there is no fixed you who has been hurt nor a fixed other who chose to hurt, forgiveness becomes meaningless. Not because you become wholly above offenses, but because the cognitive structure that requires forgiveness, one's offense to another, has dissolved. Mariana discovered she didn't need to forgive her ex-husband. She needed to see that wounded Mariana and cheating ex-husband were mental narratives, not fixed realities. And when narratives dissolve, there's nothing to forgive. The compassion that emerges from understanding. When you truly see that human behavior is the result of infinite causes and conditions, natural compassion emerges, not as a moral duty, but as a spontaneous response. The person who hurt you is acting from their own unprocessed wounds, unconscious conditioning, and limitations of consciousness. This doesn't make their behavior acceptable, but does make anger illogical. Mariana realized she didn't need to agree with people's behavior or let them continue hurting. She just needed to see that their behavior wasn't about her. It was about them. And from this understanding, appropriate action emerges naturally, setting boundaries, removing yourself from toxic situations, but without the poison of personalized anger contaminating every action. If you feel that each of these teachings dismantles something fundamental about how you've always viewed anger, let me know in the comments which one resonated most deeply. And if you want to continue this journey of perceptual dissolution, subscribe and activate the bell, because each video here is designed to be a component of complete transformation, not a fleeting inspiration. Now we're going to do something that can permanently change your relationship with anger. I don't want you to just understand it intellectually. I want you to experience directly, here and now, what happens when you explore the structure of anger. If you're in a place where you can do this safely, I'll guide you through a 90-second experiment that can dissolve the anger you're carrying right now. Bring to mind a specific situation about which you feel anger or resentment. It doesn't have to be major. It could be a small irritation from today or an old hurt that never resolved. Let the feeling arise. Feel where it is in your body. Perhaps tension in your chest, a tight jaw, heat in your face, a heaviness in your stomach. Don't try to change anything. Just observe the physical sensations without judgment. Now, with genuine curiosity, ask the question, who's angry? Don't answer intellectually. Look experientially. There are bodily sensations, but are they you? There are thoughts of injustice, but who is thinking them? Try to locate the I that is feeling angry. Look within the sensations, within the thoughts, within the emotional energy. Where's the fixed, permanent entity you call I? Take 3 deep breaths. With each inhale, ask, where is the self? With each exhale, notice what you find or don't find. You may notice processes happening, thoughts arising and disappearing, sensations fluctuating, energy circulating. But can you locate you as a separate entity coordinating all of this? Or are there simply interdependent phenomena arising and ceasing in consciousness? Now subtly shift your perspective. Instead of, I am angry, mentally declare, anger is present in consciousness. Feel the difference between these two statements. One personalizes and solidifies. The other observes the transient phenomenon. Take 3 more breaths, maintaining this witness perspective. Anger is here, but I am not anger. I am consciousness in which anger temporarily appears. When you're ready, bring your attention back to the original situation. Notice if the intensity has changed. Many people report that anger has diminished or even completely dissolved. Not because they suppressed it, but because the exploration dismantled the cognitive structure that supported it. If anger is still present, that's okay. This is a gradual cultivation process, not a magic trick. What matters is that you directly experienced, even if briefly, the possibility of relating to anger without identifying with it. This isn't positive visualization or autosuggestion. It's direct access to what Alan Watts and Zen masters taught. When you honestly investigate the nature of the self, you discover that it doesn't exist in the solid, separate form you've assumed. And when this separate self structure begins to dissolve, anger, which depends on that structure, naturally loses its power. The more you practice this investigation, the more automatic it becomes, until it becomes your default response when anger arises, rather than an exception conquered with conscious effort. Now you have the complete components of anger dissolution. But understand this with absolute clarity. These are not separate techniques that you practice mechanically. They are aspects of a single, fundamental shift. A transition from perception based on separation to perception based on interdependence. When this shift becomes permanent, anger doesn't disappear because you've become strong enough to control it. It disappears because the cognitive foundation that generates it dissolves. Buddha spent his life teaching a truth. Suffering arises from attachment to an illusory self. When you identify with the body-mind as a separate and permanent entity, you create an endless source of suffering because anything that threatens this imaginary entity generates fear or anger. But when you see through the illusion, when you recognize that there's no fixed self, only interdependent processes in constant flux, attachment dissolves, and with it dissolves the anger, fear, and resentment that depended on that attachment. Consider Mariana's journey. At first, she practiced each teaching consciously, almost forcefully. When anger arose, she reminded herself, I need to investigate the self. I need to see as a witness. I need to consider causes and conditions. But after months of consistent practice, something profound shifted. The investigation became automatic. When anger began to arise, even before it solidified into resentment, part of her was already asking, who is angry? Where is this self? And often, in this simple moment of investigation, anger dissipated before it could gain momentum. This is what masters call direct perception versus intellectual knowledge. You may understand intellectually that there is no separate self. You may find the idea interesting, philosophically valid, but as long as it's just a mental concept, it doesn't transform anything. Transformation happens when perception changes. When you see directly, experientially, viscerally that separation is an illusion. And seeing isn't thinking about it. Seeing is perceiving without conceptual mediation. Lao Tzu taught Wu Wei, action without forced resistance. Applied to emotions, this means, when anger arises, you neither resist it, suppression, nor express it blindly, reactivity. You simply observe its nature without identifying with it. In an observation without resistance, anger passes like a cloud in the sky. It appears, exists for a moment, and disappears. Heaven remains unaffected. And here's the truth that unites it all. These teachings are not about reaching a future state where you never feel anger again. They're about recognizing that the you, who feel anger, is not the fixed entity you believe yourself to be. It's a fluid, interdependent, transitory process. And when you see this, not as a pretty philosophical idea, but as direct and continuous awareness, your relationship with anger fundamentally changes. Anger may arise, but it doesn't define you. It doesn't control you. It doesn't hijack you. It's merely a passing phenomenon in the vast consciousness that you truly are. The work isn't about becoming a different, better person. It's about seeing through the illusion of a separate person that never existed except as a mental construct. Like a mirror that thinks its reflections appearing in it. When it recognizes it's a mirror, reflections lose their power to define what it is. Each practice you do is peeling back layers of illusion until only clarity remains about the fundamental interdependence of all existence. And in this clarity, anger, which depends on the belief in separation, naturally dissolves. So we come to the end of this journey, but also to the beginning of a completely new perception. Because everything revealed here, every teaching, every practice, every insight, points to a final truth that will completely collapse your previous understanding of anger. The anger you feel isn't because someone did something wrong. It's because you're operating under a fundamental illusion. The belief that there's a separate you in here and a separate them out there, and that these two can be in real conflict. But Alan Watts revealed what Zen masters already knew. Waves don't fight waves because they are both expressions of the same ocean. When one wave hits another wave, nothing really happened except the ocean moving through temporarily different forms. You and the person you're angry with are like these waves. You appear separate on the surface, but deep down, you're both manifestations of the same consciousness, the same interdependent web of existence. Your body came from the same earth as theirs. Your thoughts use the same language as theirs. Your consciousness is made of the same stuff as theirs. If consciousness is made of anything, and is not simply the fundamental field in which everything appears, when you see this, not intellectually, but perceptually, the entire structure of self versus other collapses. There are no two sides in conflict. There is only life manifesting through infinite forms, all interconnected, all transient, all without their own independent nature. And if there are no two sides, how can there be real conflict? How can there be you being attacked by other? This doesn't mean you accept abusive behavior or allow people to hurt you. Boundaries are still necessary. Removing toxic situations is still wise. But these actions can happen without the venom of personalized anger. You can say no firmly without the mental story of me being victimized by a malicious villain. You can establish distance without resentment. You can protect yourself without hatred. Because you see, their behavior isn't about you. It's the result of their own causes and conditions, their unprocessed wounds, their unconscious conditioning. And your responding without anger isn't about being better than them. It's a natural consequence of seeing interdependence. Buddha taught that awakening doesn't happen instantly for most people. It happens through the gradual cultivation of clear vision. Each time you investigate who is angry and find no solid self, perception deepens. Each time you observe anger as a witness without identifying with it, separation diminishes. Each time you see causes and conditions instead of villains, compassion grows. It's a cumulative process, like a drop of water that eventually wears away stone not through force, but through constancy. Lao Tzu wrote, "When we cease resistance to what is, we find peace in the very flow of existence." Anger is ultimate resistance. It shouldn't be this way, but it is. And your resistance doesn't change what is. It only adds additional suffering. When you stop resisting, not with defeatist resignation, but with acceptance of reality as it is, energy that was being wasted on resistance becomes available for appropriate, compassionate action. And now, in this very moment, you have a choice. You can treat this video as interesting information filed away in your mind and continue living as before. Or you can recognize that something fundamental has been touched, the possibility of a permanent release from the chronic anger that consumes your life. You can choose to begin investigation today, not when you feel ready or when circumstances are perfect, but now, with the next irritation that arises. If this video dissolves something within you, if you felt, even briefly, the possibility of existing without constantly being at war with yourself, write in the comments, "I see interdependence," not as a statement to convince others, but as a declaration of recognition for yourself. And also share which anger situation you will investigate using these practices. When you articulate intention publicly, commitment is strengthened. Subscribe to this channel and activate the bell if you want to continue this journey of perceptual dissolution, not as superficial self-help, but as a fundamental transformation of how you experience reality. Because this isn't a channel for quick fixes. It's a laboratory of expanded perception for people tired of living at war with themselves and the world. Every week, we meet here to deepen our understanding of interdependence, not as a pretty theory, but as a lived reality. As masters discovered millennia ago, you don't have to kill anger by fighting it. You just need to see through the illusion that fuels it, and it disappears like mist beneath a rising sun. Not because the mist has been destroyed, but because light has revealed that it was never solid to begin with. So, it is with anger. When the light of understanding interdependence illuminates, anger reveals itself, as it always was, a mental construct based on a misperception of separation. Keep investigating, keep seeing, keep dissolving the illusion, drop by drop, moment by moment. The rest will happen naturally. Axiom Sage, where timeless wisdom meets the peace that's always been within you. Until the next dissolution.